Hi guys,
Hi.
happy Tuesday. Hope the storm isn't causing you to hide under the bed or anything like that. We've got a baby crying upstairs because I think he's not too keen on the storm. And funnily enough, we're going to be talking about the storm that Paul had to endure tonight and about being patient in the storm. So the question tonight is, how could God help you be more patient? How could God help you be more patient? I sometimes get called a patient person. When I'm spending time with the kids, I find it very easy to be patient, and yet I often find myself to be very impatient. When there's something that I want to do, or a cafe that I want to set up, for example, and when there are barriers in the way. So I wrestle with this idea of being patient and patiently waiting. Anna's got a good example of a time when it's important to be patient, haven't you, Anna?
I have done triathlons before, and I think I find it hard to be patient in terms of my fitness levels. So I think I just expected, after having Jacob and Caleb, for my fitness levels to return to peak straight away, kind of after a week's training, but it took kind of weeks and months to get to the fitness that I wanted to get to be able to complete a triathlon well. So I think we need patience in lots of areas, maybe areas that we don't kind of naturally think about.
And now we recognise the fact that this lockdown is likely to continue longer than we anticipated, with lots of people not able to go to school this side of the summer holiday, and even in September, October it could look very different to what we are used to. It's definitely a time for us to invite God to help us be more patient. We're going to read now about this storm that Paul was stuck in with all of the people on the ship, a lot like the storm that's raging overhead, and then we'll reflect a little bit on how patient they needed to be. Thank you, Anna.
So chapter 27, Acts 27, verse 27 to the end. Is that right?
Thank you.
On the 14th night we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea, when about midnight the sailors sensed they were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 40 metres deep. A short time later they took soundings again and found it was 30 metres deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved." So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. Just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. "For the last 14 days, he said, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head." After he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. Then he broke it and began to eat. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves, although there were 276 of us on board. When they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. When daylight came, they did not recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach, where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea, and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. The bow stuck fast and would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping, but the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and to get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or on other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely.
Thank you, Anna. Everyone reached land safely, which is exactly what Paul said to the sailors during the 14 days that they spent in the storm. Can you imagine what 14 days on a ship would feel like with a storm raging around you, like the thunderstorm that's passing through the sky at the moment? It would just be so intense, so fearful, and I think it would be very hard for people to patiently wait for God to move the storm on. They would have been doubting what Paul might have shared, but I would like to believe that the Apostle Paul would have known that God would come through, because that's what he promised he would do. We see two other examples in the Bible of people who are great models of patience. We have Joseph, whose story lots of us know because of the Technicolor Dreamcoat. And so here was a man sent to prison for a crime that he didn't commit. And it's believed that he could have been in prison for 10 years, having to wait patiently for God to release him. Waiting patiently because I think he knew that if he kept it close to God, then God would allow the dream to be fulfilled that God had originally given him. And then from 10 years to 100 years that Abraham had to wait for God to give him the child that he had promised him. And that's how old Abraham was, 100 years old, when he was blessed with Isaac, who was then able to bless this world with the Jewish nation. And that's how we're all Christians now, because Abraham had the faith enough to believe that God would fulfill his promise. And so Abraham had to patiently wait. And so when we go through storms in our life, like the lockdown, it's really important for us to patiently wait for God to come through, to know that God is sometimes a God of the 11th hour, which means that often we won't see things happen in the time that we would like them to, but often there's a reason for that. And so if we can believe that God is a good God who loves us very much and wants to do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine, then it's important that we trust him enough to patiently wait for God to fulfill his plan in our life and in the lives of the people all around us. So that question again, how can God help you be more patient? And we pray that God will bless you with an extra measure of patience at the moment if you are struggling with the lockdown and wanting it to be over. Please stay in touch with us. We only have 2 more nights of Well in the Wilderness. We will be wrapping up on Thursday, so it'd be lovely if you can join us Wednesday and Thursday this week to finish off Acts and this amazing story about the Apostle Paul and the early church. Thanks for joining us and have a great evening.
See you.
God bless you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.